Good evening. Tonight, we're stepping into a story that refuses to fade. A legend whispered across centuries. A city said to shine brighter than any kingdom before it until it vanished. Atlantis. Was it a place that truly existed, swallowed by the sea? Or a story shaped to warn humanity about pride and power? For more than 2,000 years, this question has echoed through history. Tonight, we'll trace where the legend began, what the ancient texts truly describe, and how a single story became immortal. Wherever you are listening from, and whatever hour has found you here, I'm glad you're with me. Whether this story carries you into sleep or deeper into curiosity, let's begin. Ancient storytellers claimed the legend began not with a city, but with a god. Beyond the narrow gateway of the known sea, there lay a distant island. Sailors spoke of it as a place where the air tasted of salt and pine, and the horizon felt endless. At its heart stood a gentle rise of stone and red earth. There lived a young woman named Cleito, alone, guarding the memory of her family. It was there that Poseidon saw her. The sea god chose that hill as his sanctuary. To protect it, he reshaped the land itself. With divine force he carved circles into the earth, drawing water from the sea. Ring after ring formed, channels of water divided by solid ground. Paths, walls, and watchpoints emerged where nature once stood untouched. From above, the island would have resembled waves frozen in time, a design only a god could impose upon the world. At the very center of the rings, Poseidon shaped a dwelling for Cleito. Not a palace, but a place that felt watched over. He planted trees whose leaves never lost their shade, and the air there seemed to move more slowly, as if it remembered the god's presence. From the stone beneath the hill, he drew 2 springs. One carried warmth, rising in quiet mist at dawn and easing the body when night returned. The other ran cold and clear, sweet enough to drink without hesitation. Long after, farmers would claim that water from those springs made their harvests richer, their bread softer, their wine slower to sour. Even the skeptical admitted something about that place felt favored. From that union came 10 sons, born in pairs. The first was Atlas, steady in manner, measured in speech, a presence others listened to without knowing why. To him, Poseidon entrusted the entire island. It was Atlas's name that the surrounding sea would one day carry, long after gods no longer walked openly among men. The other brothers were given lands of their own, along with a bond older than any law, loyalty to the eldest. They ruled their domains freely, but when Atlas spoke, they listened. This balance between power and restraint defined the island's earliest days. The land responded generously to this beginning. Its soil shifted in color and texture, yet everywhere it gave. Dark and rich along the rivers, light and sandy beneath the trees. Grain rose in rolling fields, and vines climbed their frames until fruit weighed them down. Fig and apple trees filled baskets with ease. Olives demanded patience, but rewarded it with oil that kept lamps burning through the longest winters. Higher ground offered forests of straight timber. Lower slopes yielded reeds, clay, and pale stone that split clean under the chisel. Animals grazed well past the season's end. Hunters spoke of great beasts roaming the wild places, slow to anger and heavy with tusk and muscle. True or not, the land itself felt like an offering, giving more than it ever demanded. Atlas and his brothers could have lived as kings from the start. Instead, they chose restraint. They built with wood before stone, and stone only when necessity demanded it. Homes clustered near the central hill. The rings were used as they had been intended, not as symbols of dominance, but as protection and measure. They traveled the channels in small boats, following calm currents. No walls of pride rose in those early years. What they raised instead were shrines. At the heart of the island stood a sacred space for Poseidon and for Cleito. There was no gold yet, no gleaming roof, only offerings, a carved beam, a bowl that caught the light, a simple ring made from a strange red metal pulled from the island's veins. It glowed softly and resisted the sea's bite. In time, it would be called orichalcum and valued nearly as highly as gold. For now, it was a sign that the island held more than fields and forests. It held promise. In those first seasons, Poseidon's sons did not sit on thrones. They served as caretakers beneath a father's watchful tide. Atlas studied rough maps scratched into boards, while his brothers reported on fields, herds, and harbors. At the center of every map stood the hill, encircled by rings. They were both solution and challenge. How do you connect without corrupting? How do you invite trade without inviting danger? The brothers debated. Atlas listened. And from those quiet decisions, where to build a bridge, where to leave a grove untouched, a civilization slowly took shape. At first, strangers arrived quietly, one at a time. A fisherman chasing unfamiliar waters, a merchant carrying amber and stories from colder shores, a sailor who claimed he had reached the edge of the world and returned. None of them were allowed to pass freely. They anchored at the outer waters and waited. Guards met them with courtesy, offering cool spring water and a piece of bread. A runner carried word inward and returned with an answer. Sometimes the answer was refusal. It was a strict custom, but it preserved the stillness of the hill. The people learned that a center opened too easily would not remain a center for long. Though they were a people of the sea, their deepest respect was for the land. Fields were measured carefully, shaped to the earth rather than forced upon it. Along the river plains, channels were cut so water could flow by its own weight. Fathers taught sons how to guide the current, how to clear silt and reinforce the banks. This was not the labor of ornamented courts. It was the work that fills a day and rewards it with a full table. And yet there was dignity in it. At harvest time, the people gathered at the sacred ground and poured the first grain onto stone floors. The sound echoed like rainfall under a roof. Each year the sea reminded them of its power. There were seasons when storms erased the safety of harbors. Boats were dragged inland. Families listened from higher ground as waves struck the outer walls. When the storms passed, the island seemed reborn, washed clean beneath open skies. The rings still held. The springs still flowed. Barefoot, the people walked to the precinct and gave thanks. They were still allowed to remain. Atlantis did not rise in chaos. Its early years were measured and restrained. Atlas assumed leadership not with spectacle, but with order. He summoned his brothers to the hill and spoke plainly. Each would rule his own land. Each would owe loyalty and tribute to the High King. Disputes would be judged together, not ignored or flattered away. Pride would be reduced, duty clarified. From such agreements, the island found its balance. The city grew with intention. Bridges crossed the narrow waters so carts and cattle could pass easily. A great canal was cut to the open sea, wide and deep enough for tall ships to enter safely. Inner bridges could be raised in moments of danger. The harbor breathed like a living thing, ships arriving and departing, carrying life with them. Stone soon defined the city's appearance. White where sunlight fell strongest, red in bands and arches, black along foundations and waterlines. The great walls were faced with metal, bronze on the outer ring, tin on the next, and on the innermost, a red alloy that glowed like embers. Orichalcum. No one argued over its nature. It endured the sea, and it caught the light like dusk on the horizon. At the center, a temple rose large enough to humble, small enough to remain sacred. Within stood Poseidon's image, trident raised, horses frozen mid-stride. Nearby, Cleto's presence was honored as the beginning of all things. Laws were engraved on a pillar of orichalcum. They were more than rules. They carried the island's sense of itself. When the 10 kings gathered by ancient custom, they wore crowns of living branches. They hunted the bull as their fathers had taught them. And in those rituals, Atlantis remembered who it was before power changed the memory. The kings did not choose a tame animal for their oath. They took a bull strong enough to fight back. By the god, by the pillar, and by blood, they swore to rule justly and to judge any brother who broke the law. The ritual was stark: warm blood on stone, smoke from the fire, and nearby the two springs, one steaming, one biting cold. A man who swore there remembered it. Promises made in that place did not fade easily. Beyond the rings, the open plain carried the island's weight. Engineers cut canals straight and efficient, moving timber from the hills and grain toward the harbor. Fields were measured carefully, flood held back in wet months and shared out in dry. Herds grazed on recorded commons. Forests were cut by law. For every tree taken, more were planted. The rule was practical, not ceremonial. Within a generation, it paid for itself. The island yielded copper, tin, dark stone, and the rare red metal. At first, it adorned temples and walls. Soon it appeared in daily life: rings, buckles, bowls, ship fittings. Smiths learned how to work it so storms would not crack it. When the first seasonal gales struck the harbor, the red fittings held. Order flowed downward like water. Each prince kept records of land, people, and tribute. They reported not only wealth, but conditions. Atlas valued usefulness over display. If a village suffered, he sent orders, not praise. The city followed the same logic. Markets, forges, schools, and courts were placed where they served best. Life moved smoothly because it had been planned to do so. Festivals preserved reverence without fear. The springs were honored. Ships were celebrated. The laws were read aloud until they cut fresh again. The city did not hunger for war, but it prepared for it. Horses trained along the water rings. Ships rested ready under stone sheds. Peace endured because strength stood quietly behind it. Wealth settled into the bones of the city. Trade widened. Warehouses filled. Life became easier, and familiarity bred confidence. Then comfort. Then pride. It did not arrive loudly. It appeared in small choices: more metal, longer feasts, gentler judgments. A generation rose that had never known scarcity, and ease taught them to believe the world owed them nothing but agreement. The city began to admire itself. Walls shone brighter. Homes copied the medals of the rings. Songs praised kings more than gods. The hunt became easier. The law remained carved in stone, but practice bent. Small exceptions became habits. Coins gathered in vaults. Debt followed harvests. The navy grew splendid, but show crept in where readiness once lived. Trade brought gifts, promises, and maps filled with new markings. Atlantis still stood strong, but its balance had begun to tilt. The charts still showed harbors and currents, but the names meant something new. Where sailors once read safe water, officials now read leverage. A city that grows powerful convinces itself that obedience and friendship look the same. Those who collect the payments know the difference. Everything still looked intact. Fields were green, festivals were loud, the king still wore plain wool, the pillar still stood. And yet patience wore thin. Judges rushed cases that once took care. Officers punished irritation instead of error. Rings were worn at councils where bare hands had once been asked. Nothing dramatic, just many small breaks. Later thinkers would say the divine part of the kings had faded and the human part had grown heavy. But on the island, it felt simpler, like fatigue after long success, like wanting applause before the work was finished. Councils met without full attendance. Decisions appeared already complete. Roads were built faster than need required. Garrisons rose where danger was only rumored. Taxes tightened. Some families acquired more houses than memory could justify. Luxury arrived without announcement. The island trembled once in a while. Nothing fell. Children laughed when cups rattled. The sea climbed higher one winter and bit deeper into the dunes. Engineers made notes, kings nodded and postponed. The city developed two thoughts. One remembered the god and the laws, the other studied distant coasts. Both spoke of duty. Neither noticed duty pulling them apart. Change began with a map. Harbors gained numbers. Villages gained tallies. Notes appeared. Grain output, spear count, marching time. The sea was no longer enough. Orders followed quietly. Ships were refitted, keels laid, oars weighed, rope twisted, armor counted. On land, drills lengthened. Men learned to move as walls. The city trained not to display strength, but to apply it. Gifts became conditions. Treaties were reread with emphasis. Protection arrived with tribute attached. When a harbor hesitated, ships waited beyond the bar until hesitation ended. Order, the governors called it. Merchants asked careful questions. Sailors carried answers. Stories traveled faster than ships. Some were lies, enough were true. Across the sea, people began to speak of Atlantis as a power measuring the world. At home, ambition wore duty's mask. Kings spoke of safe routes and shared peace. Maps told another story. Garrisons linked to depots, depots to settlers. Law followed the ships. This is how empires arrive, quietly. Objections were raised and forgotten by dawn. The army learned to march away from its fountains. The navy trained for line and command. Ships grew heavier, brighter. Some sailors worried about ornament. The kings admired the shine. On distant coasts, small changes cut deep. A fee for shelter became permanent. A local elder stepped aside for an island official. A garrison stored grain for emergencies that never came. Each act seemed minor. Together, they formed a pattern. Atlantis told itself it was acting carefully. Safer docks, quieter seas, order where there had been quarrels. All of it was partly true. Excuses often are. In Greek ports, opinions split. Some welcomed calm trade. Others warned that quiet seas kill free cities. Rumor needs an enemy to grow. Atlantis now had a face and a fleet. The island did not hide its power. It believed scale would justify intent. Plans succeeded too easily. Appetite began to sound like destiny. War arrived quietly. Trade lines turned into marching routes. Tallies were read aloud. Crews counted. Supplies measured. The numbers said one thing: readiness. Summons went to all 10 regions. Ships slid from sheds, oars were weighed, armor checked. The harbor became a machine. The first fleet moved south and east. River mouths were measured. Treaties awakened. Local rulers agreed under watchful hulls. It was called friendship. It felt like pressure. Fast ships cleared pirate bays. In Sicily, a nest was sealed and broken. Survivors were offered service or death. The coast learned calm and fear. On harder shores, resistance answered. Javelins fell from hill forts. The island replied with discipline. Ditches rose. Lines held. Patience won ground. Reports reached Athens quickly. Blockades, red-beaked ships, measured movements. The city sensed a decision coming. When a harbor refused surrender, the island blockaded it. Athens answered at dusk. Local pilots guided ships over hidden bars. The blockade broke before dawn. The map victory was small. The moral one was not. Cities chose sides. Some sent ships. Some sent promises. Athens answered with schedules, not speeches. Reliability spread faster than rhetoric. The island landed east of the city. Engineers worked fast. Formations formed clean. Athens met them with the old line, shield to shield, ground chosen well. Missiles first, then the push. The island pressed. Athens bent but held. Veterans reset the line twice. Small cavalry gains mattered. Fresh island troops rushed the beach. Wet stones betrayed them. Athens answered with a steady drive. 3 paces decided the day. Standards wavered. Orders broke. The island withdrew in order. Athens held the field. A trophy rose, not as boast, but reply. The island returned to its ships. Its commanders believed the sea would decide what land had not. The war had only begun. The sea had never belonged to one city alone. It answered Athens as readily as it did the island. When the fleets met, it was in a narrow passage where judgment mattered more than numbers. Atlantis advanced wide. Athens chose the confined water. Signals snapped between masts. Athenian captains waited, then struck through brief gaps, shattering oars and hulls before slipping away. When the wind rose, Athens withdrew in order and locked hulls together. Atlantis studied the wall and turned back toward open sea. The war did not end. An illusion did. The Greeks learned the Western power could be resisted. Grain and men began to flow east. Athens buried its dead, repaired its ships, and kept its promises. Reliability became its strongest weapon. On Atlantis, confidence thinned into calculation. Garrisons demanded more. Destiny became schedules. Then the earth began to speak. Springs turned strange. Fish surfaced dead. Dolphins vanished. Stone hummed beneath the temple. The first quake was laughed at. The second woke the island. By nightfall, the ground would not rest. The sea withdrew, then returned, climbing the walls. Boats tore loose. Fire and mud followed. People fled to the central hill. Bridges twisted. Order broke. At dawn, a line appeared on the horizon, straight, fast, wrong. The sea drew back, then rose into a moving wall laden with wreckage. It struck without pause. Rings became drums of water and stone. The noise erased thought. The temple shuddered. Columns leaned. The pillar trembled. Men tried to brace it with their hands. The next surge took them. When the water fell, the pillar stood for a breath, then the floor beneath it failed, and it slid into darkness like a bell buried alive. The hill became an island of survivors. Soldiers formed lines to guide the living. Beyond them, the land unraveled. Terraces collapsed. Canals cut new paths. Hills shed boulders that reaped groves. Then came a hollow quiet. Smoke rose from damp fires. By noon, only the hill and a few rises remained above water. By evening, it was clear the island could not survive another night. Orders went out to bring every boat, every scrap of food, and abandon what could not move. At sunset, the sea rose again without foam. The ground thrummed. The hill sagged. Cracks raced through stone. Boats pushed off under falling light. From the decks beyond reach, men watched the hill sink, not topple, but descend steadily, until roofs vanished, then columns, then the last red threshold. Nothing remained but a churning stain of water and silt where a city had been, and a sea so thick with ruin that no ship could pass without breaking. Night fell without stars. Smoke and sea breath pressed low over the boats. Men rowed until their arms failed, then collapsed as others took their place. Fathers counted children by touch. Mothers whispered into ears so words would not be lost to the waves. Kings stopped being kings and carried water instead. That is the worth of a crown when the ground no longer holds. At dawn, water covered a flat plain that had not existed before. Shallow, endless, breathing slowly like a tired world. Broken walls stood like teeth, then vanished. Oars struck mud where no bottom had been. The brown belt trapped wreckage and memory alike. By noon, boats reached small harbors. Survivors stepped onto land in silence heavier than screams. Bread was shared thin, cloaks were found. No questions reopened the wound. Ships turned away from the drowned passage. Charts lied. Captains named it only the Shallows, the brown water. Survivors turned shock into work. Names were written, trades remembered, debts forgiven. The red metal lived on as brooches and blades, a final echo of a careful city that forgot how to stay careful. Thus Atlantis passed from place into story. Generations later, Solon heard the tale in Egypt from priests who remembered longer than Greeks. Plato shaped the story into a mirror, not a map, but a question. What kind of city do you choose? One that shines or one that endures? Science closed some doors and opened others. Continents do not vanish, but memories travel. Atlantis survives because it asks us to listen for false notes in our own cities. The sea does not bargain. A people survives only if it can carry its laws when the ground breaks. If this journey left a mark on you, remember to like the video and follow the channel for more stories like this. Until the next voyage into another legend, another quiet remembering. Good night.